Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and I just watched the new episode of the Orville, which was pretty awesome, especially the ending. And by the way, I don't want to spoil this episode to anyone who didn't see it yet, so please watch the episode before listening to my review. It had like a cliffhanger ending, and luckily it's not the end of the season. And there is nothing I hate more than having a tenseful cliffhanger and then waiting for a year to watch the continuation. I absolutely hate that, so luckily this is in the middle of the season and it is going to continue next week. And I think that was the most tenseful cliffhanger I've seen in a very long time, maybe since, well, I wouldn't say TNG, but maybe Deep Space Nine, some of those Dominion War episodes which ended on some kind of cliffhanger of the Dominion fleet going through the wormhole, stuff like that. So always an epic cliffhanger. Scenes like that, I always love that, so this had something similar. And we finally get to see Isaac's home planet in this episode, which is something I was waiting to see. I knew it would be something epic and something very cool. And it was pretty good, but honestly I was expecting more. I was expecting to see something much more science fiction-y, something much more bizarre and epic, and something much more weird and so on. So whenever they talked about his home planet of robots, I imagined it's probably not just a normal planet. Maybe it doesn't even look like a planet, maybe it's a giant cube in space, something like that. And yet when they show us the planet, it looks just like a normal planet. It does have all kinds of very futuristic cities, but everything seemed to be pretty humanoid. Like, I guess it makes sense since they're all humanoid robots, but still I would expect to see much more variety of different kind of robots. Like, that's what I imagined whenever I thought how it would look like. And yet it looks like a futuristic human city, so it kind of reminds me of that Atlantis episode about those humanoid replicators who had an entire planet which looked like a giant city, and also they turned out to be evil later and so on. So here with Isaac's people, they're called Kaylons, which obviously is similar to Cylons, so it shouldn't really be a surprise if they end up being evil, as robots often are in science fiction, because, you know, that's the worst case scenario. So I was really waiting to see this planet of the Kaylons, and I also thought that when we get to see his planet, they will use this for some kind of comedic situation. Like, I remember there was an episode of Futurama in which Fry had to go deliver something to a planet of robots who hate humans, and he had to dress himself like a robot to try to pretend to be one of them, and it had a lot of very comedic situations. Also an episode of South Park in which Cartman had to also pretend to be a robot for a few days, wearing a robot suit, and so that also created a lot of funny situations. So I imagine they would do something like this when we finally get to see his planet, and yet they didn't. So that might be a little bit of a missed opportunity. And all the scenery was impressive. Whenever they showed their giant city, that did look visually very great, but whenever they were on location, it wasn't that impressive, honestly. They did have a bunch of extras who all look like Isaac, and they all had red eyes to distinguish from him, I guess. And this episode didn't have a lot of similarities to Star Trek episodes. I guess it's a little bit similar to the Deep Space Nine episode in which Odo got sick, and they had to return him to the Founders so they could cure him, and then it turned out the Founders themselves infected him to force him to come back. And later, of course, they invaded the Alpha Quadrant through the wormhole, and they also used Odo for something, and so this is kind of similar to that, because Isaac got shut down so that they will take him back to his home planet, and his people turned out to be villains. They revealed to us that they have a giant graveyard beneath the city of humanoid skeletons, and they revealed that humanoid society which built them in the past had some kind of conflict with them, and then they destroyed them and took over the planet, and now they plan to expand into the rest of the universe, and presumably maybe to kill off all organic life forms who might be a threat to them. So this is something that was done in numerous science fiction movies and shows, so not so much Star Trek, because it didn't really have a lot of robots except for Data. There was that one episode called Descent in which Data also turned evil, joined his evil brother, who also ruled a group of Borg, and they planned also to destroy all organic life forms and to replace everyone with robots. So I guess it's the same kind of idea, but again not specific to Star Trek, so it's much more similar to the story of Odo, and I guess it will end up the same way when the story continues. I doubt they would get rid of Isaac as a main character, so what will probably end up happening is that he will change sides at the right moment and betray his own people to save the humans. And then he'll be able to stay on the Orville, but will also be an exile from his own people, because they will view him as a traitor. So a similar situation to Odo, which is an interesting situation, which would make the character more interesting. Obviously, he will not be able to go back to his home planet, and maybe he will try to become more human, like Data did. And so that's my prediction. I don't want them to get rid of this character because he was really good. My only problem with this episode is that what happened already kind of makes him almost irredeemable, because they show that his people actually killed some of the crew members on the Orville. And if Isaac knew about it all along, if he knew about their real plan from the beginning, then that makes him partly responsible for what happened. So all those guys who died on the Orville, then Isaac is to blame for that as well. I guess maybe if he saves the Union, and if he explains that he had to play along for a while, otherwise his plan wouldn't work, whatever he's planning to stop his own people, then maybe it would be forgivable. If he explains that was the only way he could have done that, by first allowing them to launch their invasion, so that could be okay, that could redeem the character. So that's obviously what's going to happen. He is somehow going to stop the invasion of his people against the Earth and somehow going to repel them. I hope they won't magically destroy his entire species, that would be too easy of a fix, and also they have the potential to be very good villains long term, and so I don't want them to completely win against them. That's what happened with those replicators on Atlantis. That was a bit too easy. So hopefully on this show, I do hope this show will keep going for many more years. And so it's nice to have all these different factions, and so I wish they will keep this robot race as the villains for a long term, and Isaac will be like a traitor to his people and an exile from his planet, and he will be able to stay on the Orville as the good guy who saved the Union from his own people. So that is probably what's going to happen, I hope. Maybe a little bit predictable, but I rather have that than to lose this character, which is one of the best characters, one of my favorites. And they did allude to it, like they show that he does have seemingly some kind of emotions towards the kids and Dr. Finn, and all the relationship stuff they established prior to it. So it would be hugely disappointing if he doesn't care about any of it. So obviously what's going to happen is that he will have some emotional connection, and he will make a choice to save the humans and turn against his own planet. So that's my prediction for what's going to happen next. As for this specific episode, it started out a bit slow, especially in the middle. It started to drag out a little bit, like when that kid went out to the planet to look for Isaac and he started walking through dark corridors. I have to admit I kind of increased the speed of the episode to watch it faster, because there's nothing I hate more than watching characters slowly going through dark corridors for a few minutes. I absolutely hate that, so I kind of skipped that a little bit. But the ending of the episode definitely redeemed all the slow moments it had, and it was much more epic than I expected them to do so early. And the Kalons revealing their true intentions was pretty nice, and even fun in a way, because it is like a parody of all those other science fiction shows and movies. So Kalons are like the Cylons and all that stuff. So this is classic science fiction. So it felt very familiar, but in a good way, like almost like a parody of it, but also fresh at the same time. And also it was unexpected, because they set up Isaac as such a nice guy most of the time, and his people were kind of arrogant, but I really did not expect things to escalate this way so quickly. I did not see that coming so early in the series, and so that was pretty surprising and pretty epic. And this is the kind of cliffhanger that I always loved seeing. So this is definitely one of the best cliffhangers. And also this episode finally shows us some action, because this season has been pretty boring on the action side. Like we didn't really see any real threat to anyone. We didn't see any kind of big science fiction story or any kind of battle in space and stuff like that. We saw a little bit, but not really, nothing epic. And so this episode finally delivered something epic, which is what I asked for. I remember in one of my previous reviews, I kept saying, why don't you do at least once in a while some kind of epic episode with something big happening? And so this is definitely it. And so I can't really complain about it. This is what I asked for. And it being so sudden, so unexpected is a good thing, because this way it's surprising. This way it amazes you more. And so I did like this episode. It wasn't perfect, as I said. There was some slow moments. There was some dragging in the middle. The planet itself, I think, could have been a little more interesting, especially when they showed the location shots. Some of it felt like they are filming it in some hotel lobby or something, like nothing really very impressive. Like I expected, when we saw their planet, I expected to see something much more amazing. But at least all the outside shots were pretty good. When we saw their city, it did look kind of amazing. So overall, not a perfect episode, but still very entertaining, still very enjoyable to watch, and really kept me on the edge of my seat toward the end. And luckily it's not the end of the season, so we'll get to see the continuation pretty soon, which is a good thing. So I'm really hoping for the next episode. So that's my thoughts about this one. Let me know what you think in the comments below and we can discuss it in the comment section. Let me know what you think and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.